You ever see one small moment that changes everything? Not in some movie way, but right there in front of you? That's exactly what happened in this noisy kindergarten cafeteria. The kind where trays clatter, kids shout over each other, and the air smells like tomato soup and fresh bread. Over in the far corner, this little 5-year-old girl sat all by herself. Shoulders hunched, like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. In front of her, just a piece of plain bread and a small bottle of water. No fruit cups, no milk cartons. None of the color everyone else's lunch had. Her name was Emma, though nobody at the other tables seemed to say it kindly. A couple kids kept glancing over, whispering, then letting out these short, mean bursts of laughter. One boy called something about poor lunches for poor kids, and it hit like a slap. Emma didn't even look up, just kept picking at the crust like it might make her invisible. Her mom worked 2 jobs, and some days, bread and water was all they could manage. Now, in walks Jonathan Reeves, the millionaire CEO who was just supposed to shake hands, take a tour, maybe sign a check for the school's foundation. He's got that boardroom presence, tailored suit, silver watch, the whole package. He's halfway through the tour when he spots Emma in the corner. And something about her stops him cold. He doesn't even hear the director's chatter anymore. He remembers being that kid once. Different lunch, same ache. Without thinking it through, he peels away from the group, grabs a tray from the lunch line, fills it with pasta, fruit, milk. Not for himself, but so he can sit next to her without making a scene about what she's eating. You could feel the shift in the room. Kids were watching, teachers too, like they couldn't figure out why this man was walking past all the full tables just to sit beside the girl they ignored. He crouches down. Mind if I sit here? She blinks, glances at the kids who'd been teasing her, then gives a small nod. He starts telling her a story, how once as a kid he brought dog food to school by accident. She giggles, just a little, and that's when he slides her a grape from his cup. She takes it. Shoulders loosen. The whispers fade. After lunch, Jonathan pulls the director aside, asks about Emma. Turns out, her mom Susan is raising her alone, scraping by with night cleaning jobs and grocery store shifts. Bread and water lunches aren't rare, they're survival. He asks if there's help available. There is, but not enough. And here's the thing, Jonathan could have written a check and been done. Instead, the next morning, he quietly funds free meals for every kid in that school for the next 3 years. No name attached. No press release. But he doesn't stop there. He learns about Susan's work situation, creates a steady job at his company with benefits, and has it happen to be offered to her. She never knows it came from him. He visits the school sometimes, just enough to spot Emma on the playground, reading in the corner, sketch pad in hand. One day, he donates art supplies for the whole class. She gets a new pad and holds it like it's treasure. Then, twist, Jonathan visits Susan's apartment to drop off paperwork and spots a photo of her with his half-sister Laura. The truth hits, Laura was Emma's aunt, which means Emma is his niece. Susan explains Laura passed away years ago, and she'd kept her distance from Jonathan's side of the family. She'd noticed Emma changed after that lunch day, but she didn't know why. Jonathan doesn't tell her everything he's done. He just says Emma deserves to be seen. From that moment, it's not just kindness, it's family. But he doesn't rush to tell Emma. He keeps showing up, building trust. Months later, walking through a park, he finally tells her about Laura, about how they're family. She processes quietly, then asks, "So we're related?" He says yes. She nods like it explains something she already felt. A year after that first lunch, they're back in the same cafeteria. Emma's at the center of a table now, laughing with friends. She spots Jonathan, walks over with her sandwich, breaks it in half, and hands him the bigger piece. Now it's my turn to share. And right there, he remembers that first day, that piece of bread. The way she tried to disappear. She's not hiding anymore. They walk out together, hand in hand, the first signs of spring in the trees. No grand speeches, no happily ever after. Just a bond that started with a seat at the table and turned into chosen family. And you can debate what mattered most. Was it the money, the job, the fact they were related, or just that someone chose to see her? Either way, one small act in a noisy cafeteria rewrote 2 lives. So tell me, if you were in Jonathan's place that day, would you have kept walking? Or would you have sat down? You'd think that was the end of it, right? That the story closed out with a neat little bow, Jonathan and Emma walking out of that cafeteria like a final scene in some feel-good movie. But real life isn't a movie, and the truth is, what came after was even more complicated, messier in ways you don't plan for, and better in ways you don't expect. See, once Jonathan knew Emma was his niece. Every decision he made about her life felt heavier, not because he doubted what he wanted to do, but because the stakes had changed. Before, he'd stepped in as a stranger doing what he thought was right. Now, there was no walking away. This wasn't charity anymore, it was family, even if Emma still didn't really grasp what that meant. At first, Jonathan tried to keep everything as steady as it had been. He visited once or twice a week, brought little things for her, books, sketch pads, sometimes a small bouquet of wildflowers because she'd once told him daisies made her happy. He still didn't spoil her outright. He knew enough about dignity to understand that helping someone didn't mean overwhelming them. But quietly, in the background, he kept building a safety net around her life. Susan's new job at his company was going well, but Jonathan kept an eye on things, subtle things, like making sure her hours didn't get cut when the department downsized, or that she had paid time off when Emma got sick. Susan had no clue he was pulling strings, and he liked it that way. One winter afternoon, about 6 months after that cafeteria moment, Jonathan stopped by their apartment. Emma was curled up on the couch with a blanket, sketching something with her usual focus. He sat down beside her and asked what she was drawing. She turned the pad toward him, and it stopped him cold. It was a picture of two people sitting side by side at a cafeteria table, one with a suit and the other with braids. And in between them, a grape. He didn't know whether to laugh or choke up. She just grinned and said, "That was the first time lunch tasted good." But not everything was easy. There were still moments that reminded him how fragile her confidence was. Like the day she came home upset because one of the boys at school called her bread girl again. She'd gone months without hearing it, but just one jab had her shoulders curling in that old way. Jonathan wanted to storm into the school, but instead, he took her out for ice cream that night and told her a story about a kid in his class who used to call him Secondhand John because most of his clothes came from thrift stores. He told her how he learned that people who mock you are usually just trying to hide their own cracks. She didn't say much, but she smiled before bed. And that was enough for him to know she'd filed it away. Then came the spring trip. The kindergarten was taking the kids to the City Art Museum. And Jonathan, officially as part of the foundation, offered to come along. He wasn't expecting much more than a field trip chaperone role, but when they reached the Impressionist gallery, Emma slipped her hand into his and whispered, "I want to paint like that one day." He didn't make any big promises right there, just squeezed her hand. But inside, something clicked. If this little girl wanted to paint, she was going to have the chance. By summer, he'd arranged for her to take weekend art classes at a local community center. He covered the cost anonymously, of course, but made sure Susan knew enough to encourage Emma to go. That first Saturday, he waited in the parking lot to pick her up afterward. She climbed into the car with paint smudges on her hands and a grin that stretched all the way across her face. "We used real canvases," she said like it was a miracle. Over the months, they built this rhythm: quiet dinners at their place, trips to the park, afternoons sketching side by side. And somewhere in there, Emma stopped looking at Jonathan like a visitor in her life and started treating him like someone who belonged. But here's the thing, Jonathan knew that one day, Emma was going to understand the full story. Not just that he'd helped her, not just that they were related, but that her mother had chosen distance for a reason. Family history is messy, and he didn't want her to feel caught between loyalties. So he waited, let trust do its slow work. The turning point came one crisp October evening when Emma asked out of nowhere, "Why do you always come back?" It was one of those kid questions that sound simple, but carry 1,000 unspoken things. Jonathan thought about giving her an easy answer, but instead, he said, "Because you're worth showing up for. Always." She stared at him for a long beat, then nodded like she was tucking the words somewhere safe. By the following spring, the changes in Emma were impossible to miss. She spoke up more in class, volunteered to read aloud, started showing her artwork at school events. And Jonathan, he realized that the real shift wasn't in what she had, but in how she saw herself. She wasn't the bread-and-water kid anymore, not in her own mind. The last time they walked into that cafeteria together, it felt like closing a circle. She waved to friends, joked with the lunch lady, and when she sat down next to him, she pushed half her sandwich onto his tray without a word. It wasn't charity. It wasn't payback. It was just sharing. And maybe that's the point. What started as him choosing to see her had turned into her knowing she deserved to be seen. And I'll tell you what, there's something about that stays with you. Because the truth is, any of us could walk past someone sitting alone. But once you've stopped, once you've sat down, you realize that sometimes the smallest decision ends up being the one that changes your whole life. So, if you were him, would you keep your distance, or would you take that seat?